We are heading to Washington, D.C., where Erin Hawley, wife of Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, is at the center of a Supreme Court case concerning the abortion pill mifepristone. Helen, what can you tell us about this story?
In the ongoing battle of bodily autonomy and female politicians actively working against their own interests, let us welcome to the Christo nationalist ring Erin Hawley. With third of the American populace in support of having access to birth control, Hawley thinks she knows better. Erin Hawley, wife of U.S. Senator Josh Hawley and Yale Law School graduate, is one of the faces of conservative Christian white women who are pushing against the availability of birth control prescriptions. Hawley is another right-wing grifter who is using the benefits which feminism and privilege gave her to speak in front of Congress against the health decisions of American citizens. This article's title is Erin Hawley, the woman arguing against the abortion pill, published by the New York Times and Yahoo News by Elizabeth Dias and Abby Van Sickle on March 26, 2024. Okay, man, this is a running theme on the show, aligning with the oppressors to take away the rights of others or defending the oppressors that do these things. What I found interesting about Hawley's article and her childhood, what the article mentions about her childhood, that she was surrounded by trailblazers, strong, independent women, and due to the privileges and opportunities that were afforded to her because of those women, she doesn't think other women should have the same opportunities. She is rich, she is white, she is educated, and probably had a shitload of help along the way. And this feeds into a false narrative that you can, as long as you have, an education, you have the money, you can take care of the babies. But I'm sure she has a nanny and she has the finances to, have these things to kind of help her along the way. And we all know this is not the reality for most people that identify as women in this country. So yeah. It's a problem.
Yeah, it definitely is a problem, especially being able to use your privilege to say, oh, okay, yes, I'm going to be able to come up in a particular area where I can have the education, have the privilege, have the money, and still be able to balk and push against this particular thing that could be very devastating to other people who are able to have children. But I am wanting to come to you, Jonathan. You mentioned this being an example of, and as also Helen has said, people in an oppressed group working against their oppressors to further degrade their own interests. Can you talk a bit more about that? You're on mute, Dove. Still on mute.
Okay, that's the first one. Anyway, there are several points is that this comes down to a form of future shock. And I think a lot of zealots, and I'm not sure about her because I'm not her, but she was raised by her mother and on a ranch where the foundations of her great-great-great-grandmother house were still on the property. So she had fairly independent, powerful women in her life, but they also were extremely religious, as she is. But, they actually told her that they weren't going to pay for her to go to college, and she went ahead and got a scholarship. She went to one university, I think it was either Michigan or Montana, I can't remember the name, and then ended up in Yale Law School after she transferred to Yale for the last couple of years of her degree. So she went to a big name law school and ended up eventually here. But from ranch to East Coast society must have been a culture shock.
Yeah.
But people who are trying to make everybody believe the way they do so that they can validate their own beliefs, we've talked about a lot. And that's one of the problems I see here. And that's causing her to cause other people harm. And that's not just because of that, but she thinks, and I'm sure she really truly believes, she's doing the right thing by
Mm-hmm.
upholding the values she learned in a very rural area with,
Yeah.
not so good societal norms.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. And so now I'm thinking that, how do people get to where they're opposing their own interests? And that to me is something that needs to be probably further discussed. But I really think that it's just she has a big conflict between
Right.
what she actually is experiencing and what she believes should be.
Right. I hear that. I hear that. Conflict also comes into certain people when they are employing their cognitive dissonance when it comes to maybe what they taught to currently what they believe. But I want to move on to you, Eli, now. I know that you talked a little bit more about Erin's work in overturning the Roe v. Wade case for Dobbs versus the Women Health of
Mhm.
Jackson, Mississippi, and also on 303 Creative. So, can you talk a little bit more about her involvement in those cases and maybe where it kind of like led her to what she's doing now?
Yeah, so I'll start with 303 Creative because just to get it out of the way, because it's not really related to our topic today. 303 Creative via Lanus. I'll start there. First thing first, I don't know who Elanus is. Couldn't figure it out. But 303 Creative LLC is the business of a web developer based in Colorado named Lori Smith. She wanted to move into developing wedding websites, but did not want to be asked to create a wedding website for a same-sex couple. She believes that, this is straight from the syllabus of the case written by the Supreme Court. This is on supremecourt.gov. Ms. Smith worries that Colorado will use the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act to compel her, in violation of the First Amendment, to create websites celebrating marriages she does not endorse. To clarify her rights, Ms. Smith filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction to prevent the state from forcing her to create websites celebrating marriages that defy her belief that marriage should be reserved to unions between one man and one woman. Long story short, 6-3 decision. They upheld. They determined that Colorado cannot compel the designer to create work that violates her values. Ms. Smith was represented by Alliance Defending Freedom, for whom Erin Hawley is the senior counsel as well as the VP of Center for Life and Regulatory Practice, which means something. I don't know what it is, but that means it. And so Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization is the now famous case that overturned the Roe v. Wade decision, which prohibited states from banning access to elective abortion services. The Dobbs case returned to the states the option to allow or not allow elective abortion services within their borders. From Axios.com, Erin Hawley's involvement in this case was also through Alliance Defending Freedom, helping the state of Mississippi, and this is a quote from the website, draft merits and reply briefs for the Dobbs v. Jackson case. And of the decision, Hawley said, "I'm so pleased it's a 6-3 decision. The Supreme Court has taken the shackles of Roe off the states." So this is essentially as a result of her previous work, and especially coming off of the Dobbs v. Jackson case and overturning Roe v. Wade. She's kind of on like she's feeling really good about herself, and that's a really major thing. Like, to her credit, that is a significant accomplishment. If that's what you're attempting to accomplish, then that's a really, really significant step toward that. And so now she's going to feel unstoppable, and she's going to feel like what she's doing here is just a really, really small step compared to overturning a decades-long decision from the Supreme Court.
Over 50 years, right? And it's interesting that you actually mentioned how she said the shackles off of Roe v. Wade, almost like making it the decision to be able to have bodily autonomy a slave to your mind. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what the panelists think about when you hear that quote that Eli just said, the shackles off of Roe v. Wade, and basically the the imagery that may come up in one's mind using those terms. What are your thoughts? Helen, I want to come to you about that, and then Jonathan, I want your thoughts as well.
I have a problem with that because she's basically, for some reason, thinks that taking the shackles off of Roe versus Wade, which was giving people more freedom and more access to making healthcare decisions for themselves, and basically comparing it to slavery, which is contradictory and confusing. And I'm like, girl, you need to go back to school because you got some learning to do. It's a real problem. And I understand, like, if she is anti-choice, fine. But you don't know better than half the population of the United States. I am so sorry, you don't. And yes, you have money, you have privilege, and you're like, please let me be a very good stepford wife. Oh, please, God, I'll be a very good girl. And I'm like, I am so sorry, honey. I am so sorry. But just because you want to be the nice little Christian wife and also happen to be married to a senator and have some buku bucks, fine. But your education doesn't give you the right to think you know better than other people's minds. And again, I think you should learn the definition of slavery. I think it'd be a good thing for you. Just saying.
Learning the definition of slavery and maybe like looking at how that language could be completely problematic. I think that you should learn that. Jonathan, what say you when you hear those words that she has made? You're on mute again.
Told you somebody was going to do that, right? And one of the things about this is, shackles, yeah, that's cringe. And the reason it is because it's a propaganda move. What you do is you take what the other people are doing and you turn it around and say, that's what you're doing. And so you get the bona fides of your opposition, especially when your opposition is more popular than you are. So it's like, it's a marketing ploy, shackles, Roe v. Wade shackled you to having the freedom to have abortions. Yeah, right. Okay. And snow cones shackle you to having cold something on a hot day. I mean, it's so disingenuous and it's so just topsy-turvy, and I just do not understand how somebody with a legal education as strict as hers was could actually say that and not inside cringe herself for being so stupid. And yes, dear, I'm calling you stupid because that was a stupid statement.
Yeah.
Just because you want the sound bites does not mean that you can go ahead and be ignorant on television. Guess what? Just educate yourself. If you want to be a trad wife on your ranch in Missouri, you go ahead and do that. Don't think that you can force the rest of people with uteruses into the same box you want to hide out in. Okay.
Yeah.
And
that's
pretty much all I have to say.
No, you hit the nail on the head, especially when you're talking about this position that she has placed herself in as a trad wife, Stepford wife, whatever you want to call it. Even though, yes, she is educated. Yes, she was raised by her mother. Yes, she probably even was around progressive people growing up. However, she's kind of landed here into imbuing her values, which is highly Christian, into how she is practicing, law, and especially how she's trying to change policy. And I know, Eli, you talked a bit more about that concerning the Christian values that she's really trying to inject in other people's lives that may or may not necessarily agree with her. Talk a little bit more about that, if you will.
Well, essentially, I have difficulty when people talk about Christian values because my first response is define a Christian value. Name for me some moral stance that can be taken as a Christian that cannot be taken as not a Christian. I don't think there is one that exists, and I don't think there is any moral principle or moral code that is exclusive to Christianity. I think we observe moral behavior in non-human animals, and that in and of itself, I think animals are decidedly non-religious, and that in and of itself kind of just demonstrates that there is a non-religious source for these values or ethics. And so that phrasing in and of itself typically just really kind of drives me up the wall, because I like it. Nobody has ever that I have heard. I'm sure these conversations have been had, but I've never heard anybody define what is a Christian value and why is it uniquely Christian.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, like a lot of times when people are using this whole term like Christian values and trying to like equivocate that to like some type of moral standard, to me it fails, especially when you are looking at maybe some of the standard ethical things that we all agree on as human beings, not innately Christian. If other societies especially have come to those same conclusions, like it's usually not a good idea to go around murdering people. It's usually not a good reason for you to go around stealing from people.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, like, so how, so like the question, I don't know, it's not begging the question, but it raises a question of, okay, so how did other societies come to these particular value points or moral centers without necessarily imbuing a Christian value in it? You know, I would have to say, like, even reading this particular article, I kind of landed on Hawley's unique perspective as a millennial Christian and mother adds to the depth of her advocacy efforts, resonating with many people who happen to be anti-abortionists. And I say anti-abortionists because a lot of times, and we have talked about this, is that when people say that they're pro-life, that is a misnomer. No, you are not pro-life. You are anti-abortion. Because if there are other issues that we will bring up that would be more on the nose of being pro-life, like support for families, social programs that would actually give people more money to buy food, have fair and equal housing, have, free education, Medicare for all, things of that nature, you balk against those things. So your pro-life ends after the baby is born. And so a lot of people are in those minds. Now, her argument before the Supreme Court reflects her deeply rooted faith and trust in God's sovereignty, underscoring the intersection of her religious beliefs with her professional pursuits. So there's no separation of church and state with this lady. It's all enveloped in what she does. And while Hawley's influence within her anti-abortion movement is significant, the outcomes of the case she argues before the Supreme Court remains uncertain. Nevertheless, her steadfast commitment to defending conservative principles and also promoting pro-life agendas, and we use that in air quotes, actually highlights the enduring influence of faith and values in shaping legal discourse and policy decisions. And unfortunately, with this legal discourse influenced by faith and values, it definitely blurs the line between separation of church and state. So I just want to go ahead and just give my panel the final say. I would like to get you guys' final thoughts, starting with you, Helen, then Eli, and then we're going to round it up with you, Jonathan.
I do want to say that Hawley works for the Alliance Defending Freedom organization, and they are listed as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center because they support recriminalizing LGBTQ plus people from engaging in consensual sex acts, and wants to make being LGBTQ for that being an adult to be sterilized, which they supported in other countries. So if you happen to be trans, you could get sterilized. This is something that the Alliance Defending Freedom, I find the freedom in that so ironic that this woman is a part of. So she is a Christo-nationalist. She is fighting for the things that we are fighting against, and I think it's disgusting. And again, I'm tired of people aligning with their oppressors. It's gross and disgusting. Please stop. It's going to be bad.
Her arguments that mifepristone is unsafe and the testimony she's gotten from doctors, it's been labeled as I don't remember what the term was it was used in the article, but it's inconsistent. It's not substantial. The FDA has been extremely clear that mifepristone is safe, yet Erin Hawley is using the false claims that it isn't to push her Christian values once again, to get rid of what she sees as this horrendous sin of abortion, push these values into your life from the right arm of a sitting U.S. senator. And if at that, from my neck of the backwoods, and it's not enough for them to just not do the thing that they don't like. They have to make sure that you can't do it in the privacy of your own medical appointment either. Erin Hawley is a person whose entire public identity, sure, her professional identity, she's a lawyer, but her public identity, she is a mother, and her public identity centers around motherhood, and she sees abortions as a threat to motherhood in general, and that's why she is so. That's one of the reasons she attacks abortion so strongly.
And Jonathan?
You're muted, sir.
You're muted.
No, I had my finger on it this time. Her writings also kind of belie an awful lot of her attitude. Her writings are actually disgusting. One quote I have from her book is, "Make sure you focus on your husband." Poor little girl. I feel sorry for her. Her first book title, A Christian Guide to Parenting, kind of says it all. I have not read it, but it kind of makes me cringe a little bit knowing what it probably says. I haven't, and I'm not going to read it because I don't like throwing up. I wish she could do the same as she preaches and leave the ADF and lawyering to men, her superiors. Now I'm going to go wash my mouth out with soap.
Well, as skeptical humanists, we must critically examine the implications of such activism on issues of bodily autonomy, gender equality, and reproductive rights. And while also acknowledging the profound influence of faith and tradition on individuals like Erin Hawley, we have to look at it with a very fine lens. And one of the things that you can do, dear viewer, is look at more of these wonderful nonprofits videos with a fine lens by clicking here